All right, good evening. Good evening. At this time, we call this special commissioner meeting to order, April the 5th, 2022 at 6:30. At this time, we have the invocation, and following that, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. A moment of silence at this time. Amen. All right, at this time, stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, liberty and justice for all.
Yes, it is. All right, Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Williams,
Here.
Vice Mayor James,
Here.
Commissioner Ambrose,
Here.
Commissioner Jones,
Here.
Commissioner White,
Here.
All right, thank you, ma'am. At this time, entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
I make a motion that the agenda be approved as printed.
I'll second that.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? And then all in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Moving on to item number 1. We want to address.
Mayor, number one is on the water facilities plan. So can we move on to 2, which is the comprehensive plan? And then we'll come back to 1 when Bruce is here.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. All right. Item number 2.
You just want me to go ahead? Good evening. My name's Allison McGrath. I'm a certified planner with Kimley Horn. I appreciate the opportunity to be back before you this evening. I know that we spent a lot of time together over the last couple of years working on this document. I know we've got some new faces on the commission, so I want to welcome you, Commissioner. It's nice to meet you, and look forward to moving through this important part in the process this evening. I would be remiss in thanking your staff for all the effort that they have put to get us to this point this evening. This has been almost a 2-year work in progress. As you know, we transitioned from city managers throughout this process. And so we've taken a little bit of extra time to make sure that what we're representing in the City of High Springs Comprehensive Plan is headed in the direction that this commission and that your staff is intending it to go. So if it's all right with you, Mr. Mayor, it's the pleasure of the board. I'd be happy to give you a brief presentation. We certainly aren't going to go page by page through the entire document this evening. So I hope that works for everybody. But then I'm certainly happy to take any questions from the board or from the public that you may have. So just a brief little history on comp planning. So as I mentioned, this is going to be the document that kind of guides the City of High Springs for the next 20 years. This is statutorily required. I'll talk about that in a minute. And again, it's not for the faint of heart. This has been a lot of hard work that has gone into this overall process. At the end of the day, this is for use by the public. It's for use by the city. It's for use by the board, and certainly for staff and you in your decision-making process going forward. This comp plan will take you through the year 2040. So as we go through the comprehensive plan, you'll see that it's set forth with goals, objectives, and policies. That's a typical hierarchy that we see in comprehensive plans, implementing your broader vision and then drilling down into how we will implement that vision. Ultimately, what it ends up doing is providing the framework for you to update your land development code. So if reading this document wasn't enough for you, know that on the horizon, you'll have an update to your land development code coming down the pipe, because what inevitably happens when we update the comprehensive plan is that now it's out of compliance with your land development code. So the two need to be trued up. Statutorily, that's required to happen within 1 year of the adoption of your comprehensive plan. Chapters 163 of Florida statutes is the guiding document that we utilize for updating a comprehensive plan in the state of Florida. So every local government in the state of Florida is required to update their comprehensive plan. It's supposed to happen every 7 years. There is a schedule that the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity keeps. Not everybody keeps to that schedule. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But the reason they do it every 7 years is there are legislative changes that happen most years that have a direct impact on your comprehensive plan. And so it's important for there not to be too long of a lag between when those statutes are adopted and when your comprehensive plan is updated. You may recall in 2011, when Governor Scott was brought into office, he did sweeping changes to the growth management laws in the state of Florida, and there were hundreds of changes that happened, not the least of which was the removal of Chapter 9J5 of the Florida Administrative Code, which provided us with a whole lot of details on how to implement a comprehensive plan. And in removing that legislation, it really kind of changed the face of what comprehensive plans look like. The city of High Springs has not done an update to their comprehensive plan in its entirety since those changes were made. So where we start when we look at updating your comprehensive plan is looking at a full update to the comprehensive plan based on all changes that have happened to Florida statutes since your last update. Your city manager can show you a copy of that document. I think it's probably 40 pages long, that just talks about the outline of the changes that happened, and we had to make sure that we addressed them if they were applicable to the city of High Springs. We'll be submitting that document along with the comprehensive plan when we transmit it to the state so that they can verify that those changes have been made and are appropriately addressed in your updated comprehensive plan. We also did an inventory and assessment. So after we look at the statutory changes, we do a diagnostic, if you will. And so we call that data inventory and analysis. We look at everything as it relates to the comprehensive plan based on updated population projections that are provided by the University of Florida Beaver. And so everything that you'll see in the comprehensive plan before you is reflective of those population projections. And that data inventory and analysis will also be submitted to the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity along with your update to your comprehensive plan. Ready to get into it? Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to pause and take questions along the way if that's the preference of the board, or I can hold and take questions at the end, whichever might be easier for you. I find sometimes with the comprehensive plan, it's maybe easier to ask the questions while we're on the topic, but it's certainly whatever the pleasure of the board.
That'd be fine.
So please feel free to interrupt me if you have something that's specific to what I'm talking about. So the City of High Springs 2040 Comprehensive Plan will consist of 12 elements. So under Florida statutes, they refer to them as elements. You can consider that a chapter, if you will, in your plan. 9 of these are statutorily required. So there are some elements that you have in your comprehensive plan that are voluntary that we were asked to include with your comprehensive plan. Those would be an economic development element. If you recall, we were fortunate enough to work with the City of High Springs to develop an economic development study a couple of years ago that was funded through the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity through the Competitive Florida Partnership Grant Program. So we've taken the findings from that study and we've incorporated them into an economic development element in your comprehensive plan. What that does is it sets the stage for you to be able to apply for funding that's related to economic development, because now you have a history of having a guiding document that will allow you to point to that when you're applying for funding. So it's a good thing to include in your overall comprehensive plan. Another element that is not statutorily required is the historic preservation element. You did previously have a historic preservation element in your comprehensive plan. All we've done for the purposes of this update is to refresh that, make sure that there aren't any citations that are out of context with the Florida statutes, and we have left that more or less intact in your comprehensive plan. Back several years ago, it may have been 2011 with the sweeping changes, but public school facilities element is no longer a required element in the comprehensive plan. However, based on the interlocal agreement that the City of High Springs and the other municipalities in Alachua County have with the Alachua County School Board, we have left that in your comprehensive plan. Pretty much if you look at any comprehensive plan in the municipality municipalities within Alachua County, the language is identical because the interlocal agreement covers all the municipalities. It'll just be changed out, the High Springs versus Alachua, for example. Any questions about just the overall setup of your comprehensive plan? So I mentioned earlier that we go through goals, objectives, and policies. In addition, there is a map series. You may have heard this referred to as the Future Land Use Map Series. There are statutory requirements for the minimum number of maps or minimum types of maps that need to be included in your comprehensive plan. You'll see those peppered throughout the updated comprehensive plan, but we also have a standalone document that just is the map series that will be available for you and for your staff and for the public's use going forward. So you'll see an updated map series. That map series in particular looks at things such as any land that's been annexed into the city since your last update or since the last map changes that you may have had done by the Regional Planning Council over time. But you'll see that anything that has been annexed in up until last month is now included in the map series that you're looking at this evening. And I want to thank your city staff. Ms. Adkins has been a trooper, for lack of a better term, and being able to help keep us up to date with the changes that you've been making. I know y'all have been busy with annexations over the last few years, so it's been really just a true pleasure to work with your staff throughout this process. And so the other thing that we do is we take a look at language that has wound its way into your comprehensive plan that may be better suited in the land development code regulations. So say, for example, we have a language that's in your comprehensive plan that strictly relates to how a particular piece of property is to be developed. If you ever want to change that in the future and it's in your comprehensive plan, you have to go through a formal text amendment to be able to do that, which is a lengthy process. As you know, it has to be reviewed by the state. It comes to a hearing before the plan board. It comes to 2 hearings before you. And really some of those things, if you put those in the land development code, you can make changes to those without that having to go through that process. So we strip those types of items from your comprehensive plan and put them more appropriately in your land development code. And that's pretty typical. Every municipality does that. It just happens over time. They write a policy to try and take care of a particular issue and think that it's, it's most appropriately put in the comprehensive plan, but it just binds municipalities in the future going forward. So we try and clean it up through this process. So we will go ahead and start talking about the future land use element. So if you've had the opportunity to review the document, the future land use element really is the crux of your entire comprehensive plan. The future land use element really touches all the other elements within your comprehensive plan. So for the purposes of moving through this presentation this evening, what I have done is really focused on the future land use element. And within that element, I've got slides broken out that will further discuss the things that you'll see in the other chapters, unless you really want to go chapter by chapter through the entire document this evening, and then I can pivot and do it on the fly if that's the pleasure of the board. I thought this would probably be the fastest way to cover the highlights for you, but certainly this is your transmittal hearing, and I'm happy to do it whichever way you'd like. So your future land use element, the first objective that we have is for the establishment of the future land use map that will guide development. You'll see behind your city attorney this evening. That's your current future land use map. So just as a reference point, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the future land use map. That map shows the property designations. It shows the land use categories for every property within the city limits. It really becomes the document that's probably most used by your city staff in making land use decisions going forward. So it's the most important piece of information that relates to your comprehensive plan. We spent hours, the city manager, Ms. Adkins, myself, my staff, working on the update to the future land use map, noting the importance of that map and what it means for the city, setting the densities and intensities for development in all properties within the city. So you'll see some pretty significant changes to the future land use map from what you currently have today, hopefully setting the stage to be able to accommodate future growth in a responsible manner in the city of High Springs going forward. So what you see before you here, and this is certainly in your updated comprehensive plan that you have before you, if you can compare that briefly to the map that you see behind Ms. Parker, you can note that there are color changes that have happened. Color doesn't really matter so much, but just to quickly walk through what that means. If you look at your current map and you see that dark yellow area, and you notice that that has changed significantly on the map, that particular land use has not, it's not that it has changed so much, it's that the color has changed because we've added an additional residential land use. As your future land use map stands right now, you don't have any way to accommodate medium density residential. There was a very strange gap in your current comprehensive plan that allowed development from 1 to 4 dwelling units per acre, and then it jumped up, I want to say, to 12 dwelling units per acre. And so now we've kind of filled in some additional land use categories that will allow for some flexibility. So looking apples to apples, essentially what you see on the new map in that light yellow, or some may refer to it as a taupe color, that remains predominantly the same as what you would consider your residential suburban land use category right now. However, we're calling that low density residential, and that is still the 1 to 4 dwelling units per acre. What you now see in the new map as the bright yellow is the new land use category that will be medium density residential, that will allow some additional dwelling units, up to 6 dwelling units per acre. So that allows you to accommodate future growth in a responsible manner without automatically jumping to 12 dwelling units per acre. So you can see that we have gone through the future land use map and we've added it in areas where we think that we can anticipate some future growth that would be done in a responsible manner, and that would be tied to future infrastructure improvements throughout the city. Other things that we've done, so in the light green area, so looking apples to apples, you have a lot of the green on your current future land use map. On the new future land use map, just as a point of reference, if you see that land that's out to the west end of the town of the city that was recently annexed into the city, that's the agricultural land use category. It was the direction of your city staff to have us remove that from being part of or following the Alachua County agricultural land use regulations. So if you were familiar before, anybody that had agricultural land within the city limits was bound by the regulations of Alachua County by default. Just the way your comprehensive plan was written, it was not under the purview of the city. So we have removed that now. So any agricultural land that's within the city limits will follow the city's agricultural policies. We did align those with Alachua County for the purposes of this document. So you won't see much of a change as you read through that section, but just know that that's now agriculture is now a city land use category through the adoption of this comprehensive plan. There's probably some other changes, but if you don't have any specific questions, Mr. Mayor, board, I'm happy to move on, or I can pause for a moment and take any specific questions.
So for the parcel that was just recently annexed, it's agricultural.
Yes, ma'am.
But there are really no restrictions on how that's can be developed at this point in terms of renewable energy, because obviously we all know that Duke wants to put a solar plant there.
Mm-hmm.
There's zero restrictions on their ability to do that.
No, ma'am. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, is it all right? So it's not that there are zero restrictions. It's now that they follow the City of High Springs agricultural land use goals, objectives, and policies. So instead of following Alachua County's, you follow the agricultural policies that are set forth in your comprehensive plan. Just like any other of the land use categories here has specific rules and regulations, if you will, associated with it. This is now within the city and follows the city's goals, objectives, and policies. So rather than just defaulting or deferring to the county's goals, objectives, and policies for ag.
And prior to this, did the city have any agricultural land within its limits?
Yes, ma'am. The city had agricultural land. The city had agricultural land use designations, and any properties that were agricultural would follow the Alachua County regulations instead. And the direction that we had from city staff was that home rule was really how we wanted to approach this.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to want to see what that actually means in terms of High Springs, but that can be
Sure.
a different conversation.
I'm happy. I'm
Thank
happy.
you.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
So then, like some of the pockets that's still Alachua County, but it's in the city of High Springs, and some of those properties is zoned agricultural. So how do that fit in with?
Yeah.
Are they still going by the county? Are they? 'Cause it's-
So, Mr. Mayor, there's two different parts to your question. So, this is land use. This isn't zoning. So they're two completely separate things. Your zoning will come when you update your land development regulations, but as it relates to what we call out parcels in the industry, so there are certain pieces of property within the city limits that are not in the corporate city limits, but they're pockets within that are still listed as Alachua County property. We did not touch those properties as part of this update. There's a long and lengthy process, and I know the city attorney's office, since I've been working for High Springs, the city attorney's office has been working on trying to annex those properties in, but you have to have the willing property owners. So currently, any of those properties that are not within the city limits, even though they look like they're in the boundary, still follow all all Alachua County land use and zoning regulations. So I know that's a lengthy and challenging process to try and get those converted over, but they're not affected by what we're doing here this evening. Any other questions about the future land use map? Wow, this doesn't translate very well on the screen. Hopefully you can see this all right. So this is an update to the tables that you have in your current comprehensive plan. What this does is really at a glance provide a cheat sheet, if you will, for your staff and for you as you make future land use decisions. It will allow you to be able to look at a future land use category, quickly see what the densities and intensities, and by that I mean the number of dwelling units per acre that are permitted in each of the land use categories, and then also the non-residential component that would be permitted in those land use categories. So what we did was just simplified the way that it's currently represented in your comprehensive plan, made it on one sheet where your staff can literally have this sitting on their desk. And if somebody calls and asks what can go in that land use category, they have it in a singular document. Any questions about the density and intensity sheet? Moving on to objective number 2. So under this is directing development patterns. So we always want to make sure that we're encouraging development where development should go. So not necessarily having heavy development at your outskirts and then making it lower development as you get closer to town. It's really the other way around. You want to have your most intense and your most dense land uses in the center of the city, and then have that transition out into the rural or the agricultural area. So we just really went through here and made sure that we updated your urban service boundary map, and also kind of looked for goals, objectives, and policies that encouraged development towards the center of the city and discouraged sprawl as we move to the outer limits of the city. Included is the updated urban service boundary map. We did not change the urban service boundary itself. This map just represents the annex properties into the city limits. The reason we didn't change the urban service boundary is because I know that there are several efforts going on right now to look at the city's utilities, and it's the utilities that really drive that boundary. So as you are able to work through updating your water or creating a water master plan and a wastewater master plan, you're going to want to go back and take a look at the urban services boundary and make sure that you true that up. So just know that this is the same boundary that's shown in red here as what you have in your current comprehensive plan. Any questions about objective number 2? Objective number 3 is looking at a sustainable mix of uses. So this I would hope is pretty self-explanatory. We want to make sure that we balance uses within the city. We don't want to have the city of High Springs just be a bedroom community to the city of Gainesville, for example. We want to make sure that people have the ability to live, work, and play within your corporate boundaries. So making sure that we're looking at the balance of land uses within the city to make sure that we don't have too much residential, we don't have enough commercial, we don't have places for people to go and enjoy parks and recreation. We looked at all of that through you heard me mention earlier, the data inventory and analysis, the DIA that we start with when we look at a comprehensive plan, and that's where we identified all of that. You can see the balance of uses that are listed in there, and reflected under Objective 3 of the future land use element are the policies that ensure that we're implementing the proper balance of uses within the city. So you'll see a little bit different. The header here is in light blue. This one's in black. When I hit a header that's in blue, it's because this is reflective of a separate chapter, a separate element in your comprehensive plan. You heard me say when I started off that we're going to focus on the future land use element, but within the future land use element, all the other chapters feed in. So when you see a light blue header at the top here, that means that there's a whole separate chapter that deals with housing within your comprehensive plan. But as it relates to this presentation, I'm going to focus on how we tied that back together in the future land use element. So looking at housing, obviously we want to make sure that we are providing a wide mix of housing types within the city, providing an opportunity, pardon me, let me phrase it that way. We aren't actually providing the housing. We're making sure that we have ample opportunity for people to have different types of housing in the city. And that's not only in terms of size, but it's in terms of type, which then translates into price point, right? So we have the ability to do up to 12 dwelling units an acre, which then allows you to have multifamily dwelling units, but it also, we've accommodated 1 dwelling unit per acre as well, which then allows you to have homes on larger lots and such, and everything in between. So we also are bound by Florida statutes to make sure that we look at having a plan for properties that are distressed or at risk. So tying together with your community redevelopment agency and some of the efforts that they are charged with looking at, that filters into your comprehensive plan. So we make sure that we statutorily are compliant with the policies that we provide, so that we are making sure that folks that have that type of housing, the city's paying attention to that, and we'll take proper action to be able to make sure we have safe and sanitary housing for all. We also ensure that we include policies that relate to the update of infrastructure. So we don't want to do a whole bunch of housing in an area that doesn't have access to water and sewer. So making sure that the timing of such is aligned with development throughout the city, we made sure that we included policies that relate to that as well. And then personally, now me finding myself in a situation with not having great mobility myself, making sure that we're accommodating policies for folks with disabilities as well. In particular, ensuring that access to non-residential uses is important for folks that have needs that may otherwise not allow them to just physically get to the places within town. So we made sure that we included policies that specifically address housing for all, all-inclusive housing. Any questions about the housing element? Is this pace okay for you? Am I going too fast or too slow? Okay. So moving on, we're back to a black header. So now this is now back specifically talking about something just related to the future land use element, maintaining and enhancing the character of the established neighborhoods. This city's been blessed with a lot of really great neighborhoods. And the last thing we want to do inadvertently when we update a comprehensive plan is make changes to policies that all of a sudden result in a complete upheaval of the reasons why people choose to live in this community. You have a lot of folks that are migrating to this community because it's quaint and it has character, and we don't ever want to bring in goals, objectives, and policies that cause that to go away, right? And a lot of folks, probably a lot of you, were born and raised here, lived here most of your lives, and don't really want it to change. But you also have to recognize that growth is coming, and we just need to do it in a responsible manner. So we just make sure that we look at policies related to infill, for example, to make sure that it's compatible infill. You're not going to have a mega mansion, for example, that's next to some of your old traditional housing. So things like that is what we looked at as it relates to maintaining the current character of the community. Historic preservation, you'll see it highlighted in blue. This means that there's a separate chapter that specifically deals with historic preservation. I mentioned earlier, we didn't stray too much from your existing policies. We do through the data inventory and analysis that we do, reach out to the Florida Department of State Division of Historical Resources and make sure that the resources that we capture in your comprehensive plan are reflective of what the state has on record. So you will see a map that's in your comprehensive plan that shows the location of all of the registered historic places, buildings within the city. Certainly, if you want more information on that, if you look in the data inventory and analysis, there's probably more information than you care to read at this current juncture. But know that that's how we come up with this data. It's not by us just guessing or individually researching it. We rely on the Department of State as our agency partner that maintains that record to reflect this in your comprehensive plan. We also included policies that set the stage for seeking third-party funding opportunities that allow you to not only rehab historic structures, but also to encourage the rehabilitation of private property owners for the historic structures. So as somebody that does a lot of grant writing, it's important to me to make sure that we set the table for you so that when you go to apply for grants, you can point back again to the fact that you have policies. This is something that the city has been thinking about, and it just gives you some supporting documentation that will allow you to move forward with grant applications and hopefully be successful in trying to offset some of those improvements. Any questions about historic preservation?
Yes, so go back to your map. So now is that the whole city or is just the downtown area?
No, sir, this is reflective of the whole city. If I don't think I can zoom in on this, but it does show all properties that are outside of the downtown core as well. Anything that the Department of State has on their record for being a historic structure is shown on this map.
Okay, so
Ms. Christie, Ms. Adkins.
so that map includes those houses that you showed me on that list of considered as historical houses throughout the city?
So the pink
Yes.
is what it says it's a historic district. So it's
Correct.
basically downtown.
Correct.
So then all the outline little dots here are
Yes.
still historic structures.
Yes, ma'am.
What makes it a historic structure?
So I will be the first one to tell you that I am not a historic preservation expert. I rely on the data that's provided from the Florida Department of State as it relates to historic resources. I think there is a process for them to be specifically designated based on age, based on probably based on characteristics to make sure that things have not been altered from the original intent of the style, the historic style, and then they get listed on the Register of Historic Places.
So it looks like most of these outline are probably homes.
I would
I'm
that they
guessing.
are, yes.
And one of them I think is mine. That's why I was wondering, like, I think that's my house.
Well, we certainly have the exact address for all of those properties. Either Ms. Adkins can provide that to you or I can provide that to you. But yes, we get the list.
Oh, no.
We get the list. Well, you may have an opportunity then, Commissioner, to apply for funding if you had any improvements that you want to do. There's actually a quick grant plug right now. The Department of State opened 2 grant opportunities yesterday specific to historic structures. So yeah, I'm happy to give you a call and talk to you about that further and give you the additional information if that's of interest to you.
I would love to have it. 'Cause there's a family in town that they want to redo their house, which is on that list. And nice old house. But they don't have
Mr. Mayor, I'll make sure that I send you a copy of the list of the historic properties as provided by the state. Any other questions related to historic preservation? So moving on to the objective number 5, that's supporting the continued revitalization of downtown as a destination. This is something that's pretty new in your comprehensive plan. Spend a lot of time working with your staff to really make sure that we're being forward thinking, and especially in some of the growth that you've seen within the community here, not the least of which is the brewery. So kind of taking some of those things and some of the improvements that you've made around the old depot and looking at other communities that really create a destination within the downtown area. So think of this section as if you want to have a festival and you want to block off the streets and you want to be able to potentially, I'm not saying one way or another, have open carry. You want to be able to buy beer and wine and be able to wander through and take a look at that. The stage has been set for the commission to be able to do some of those things. So that is really what we are intending by creating this as a destination. We've created an entertainment district. And so if you want to move forward with having any of those events, know that it's now permitted under your comprehensive plan. Once you get the implementing land development regulations put in place that give you the finer details as to how that would operate. Any questions about that? This map is reflective of the downtown development district, as we're calling it, and out of simplicity's sake and in working with your staff, it's the same boundary as you see with your current community redevelopment agency boundary. We initially looked at a different boundary and then decided, we're not trying to make things harder on your staff, we're trying to make things easier on your staff. So the boundary is aligned with your CRA, your community redevelopment agency district, and so anything that happens can happen in that entire area. Moving on to objective number 6. So this is looking at the provision and the maintenance of public infrastructure. This is always a critical part of any comprehensive plan. We don't want growth to happen in an area, as I've mentioned before, that is not able to sustain itself. And the provision of water and sewer is an important facet when it comes to that. So one of the things that is statutorily required is that the city has to do an annual capital improvements plan, capital improvement program. There's a whole section within the comprehensive plan that deals with capital improvements that is supposed to be, doesn't have to physically be updated in your comprehensive plan every year. It does have to be updated every 5 years. But as a board, you are supposed to update, you are supposed to adopt an annual capital improvements plan. I'm hoping that you do that. So again, looking at resiliency and sustainability is really what our focus is here, making sure that the city is able to accommodate growth in a responsible manner that allows you to be fiscally neutral or positive going forward. Any questions about objective 6?
They require. Go back. Require new development
I'm going to put a star beside that one. Put mayor's policy. So the encouragement of activity centers. So this is similar to something that you already have in your comprehensive plan. We've just changed the nomenclature a little bit. I don't think that, if I recall correctly, I'll apologize right now for my old and somewhat faulty memory. I'm not as sharp as I used to be, but I seem to recall that you didn't call it an activity center before, but essentially just making sure that we have nodes within the city that can accommodate mixed use development, to noting that all land uses don't have to be their own separate land uses, and that sometimes it makes sense to have something. Again, this is not an endorsement, but just giving you an example for reference, something similar to the town of Tioga that has a mix of uses in one location. So these policies here are specifically designed to give the city the flexibility to encourage something like that if it's the wish of this board as developments come down the pipe. Questions about that?
So City Manager, so will there be a definition of basically what mixed use is?
Yes, sir. Yes. So in the goals, objectives, and policies, it specifically says the types of uses that are encouraged and permitted in there. And then given the specific land use categories that are related to your future land use map, it shows where those areas should be.
the zoning categories have to correspond with the land use.
Okay.
So as it moves forward, and we'll further refine that in the LDC, because after this, we start working on the LDC.
When I see mix, that make me think mix mean anything.
No, it's a very good question, Mr. Mayor. It will be defined, and these will be things that aren't just permitted by right. It will have to come back before you for approval anyway as it goes through the development process. So know that it's not just a free-for-all, but specifically encouraging the mix of restaurants and residential, or live-work lofts, where there's commercial downstairs and residential upstairs, having the flexibility to do some of those things, but also we required that there be plazas and parks and things like that as well. So it's not just a built environment, it's providing for the opportunity for people to be out in the public as well.
A good example would be if someone came and wanted to redevelop the peanut mill site, that would probably be a mix of uses. So that would kind of example.
Moving on to objective 8, sounds very simple, creating a sense of community, but again, tying back to the downtown development district, the entertainment district that we talked about a few minutes ago, making sure that there are policies that support community events. So we're big proponents that the lifeblood of the community is really the people, right? And if there's nothing for your people to do, then they become disinterested and disengaged in the planning process. And so having opportunities for people to get together and gather, thank goodness we're past the past 2 years where we weren't allowed to gather, but just having the opportunity for people to be able to do that, we thought is important. And this section also deals with the regulation of signage, albeit it's relatively brief in the comprehensive plan because the signage policies really come into effect when we're dealing with the land development code regulations. So you will see changes in your land development code regulations that specifically delve into signage requirements. Any questions about just basic sense of community policies? Okay. Then we talk about quality parks, recreation, and open space. I would be remiss in not congratulating your Parks and Recreation staff for the efforts that they have put in over the last couple of years. I'm sure it's been a lot longer work in progress, but I have been watching it intently, the things that they've done, the things that the city has done as it relates to Parks and Recreation as we've been working on this process. Again, when we do the data inventory and analysis, one of the analysis that we have to do is looking at your Parks and Recreation facilities. Couple things come to note. You far exceed what is statutorily required. There is a statutory requirement for how much parks and recreation you have to have. And your level of service that you had in place before we did the update to the comprehensive plan puts the city in a position of having more than the adequate, the minimum amount of parks and recreation open space. But with the direction of your city manager, we have actually even increased that level of service standards. So going forward, as development occurs, you'll see that additional parks and recreation space will be required. And again, once you give that land up to private development, you can't get it back. Right. So to the benefit of the direction of your city staff, should really be congratulated for being forward thinking and putting those policies in place as development comes down the pipe. So I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge that. Again, adding policies that relate to all ages and all abilities. So encouraging parks that allow for folks with disabilities, or as we prefer to call it, people of all abilities. So so that it's not put in a negative light, but rather in a positive light. So you'll see policies in there that specifically encourage that, and then always building on your current linkages for trails and sidewalks and paths and alternative routes to be able to reach your recreational facilities is something that we include in the comprehensive plans. Anything related to parks? Here's your updated parks map. It doesn't really look like much on here because the map is so large to accommodate the entire city limits, but just know that you exceed your level of service requirements. Objective number 10, this is dealing with low impact recreation and resource protection tools, not to be confused with your parks and recreation element. This is really more dealing with your conservation lands. So we note that conservation lands aren't necessarily walled off and not available to the public. So we call it low impact recreation, where you can walk, you can sometimes ride bicycles. Some locales allow horseback riding, things like that, but not motorized vehicles within those. So that's what these policies are related to here. Again, making sure that we're focusing on the connections so that you end up with a real network of your parks and recreation and conservation facilities. Any questions about that? Noting that this section is highlighted in blue at the top, it has a blue header. This means that there is a separate chapter that's specifically dealing with parks, recreation, and open space. It's all the things that you would traditionally see. I kind of highlighted some of them in the last 2 slides, but know that there's a whole section that really focuses on bolstering your parks and recreation goals, objectives, and policies. And again, setting the stage for future opportunities for the city to build economic development around recreation. So I know that there was a lot of talk related to having some of the competitions here in the community and really kind of building on resource or recreation tourism. And so we've put policies in place that would allow for the encouragement of some of those things. And that is tied together with the economic development strategy that was done last year. Future land use element, objective number 11. This is very straightforward. Protection of regional resources. This is statutorily required. So we fall back on map series that are provided from various state agencies, the Department of Environmental Protection, the Swanee River Water Management District, and other such agencies. So know that we have studied all of that and made sure that what is reflected on your future land use map is tied together with the maps that are demonstrating regional resources that you have that need to be protected. And so part of the future land use map series, you will see the maps that are associated with that as well. Any questions related to regional resources? Objective number 12, plan for annexation. Mr. Mayor, to your point about the out parcels that are currently in the boundaries of the city limits, but they're not part of the city. They're actually part of Alachua County. This is where we identify that there's additional work that needs to be done there. Ideally, you don't want to have those out parcels, those pockets within your community. It makes it very challenging from a search and rescue or for services, because is it the county's responsibility to provide services to those folks, or is it the city's responsibility? They're not paying taxes in the city. And so it really becomes an issue. So I would personally encourage this board to continue working on those efforts with the city attorney's office to make sure that as best as you can, try to eliminate those out parcels. I want to say that there's 8 or 10. Ms. Parker, do you know?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I mean, put you on the spot. Sorry. I think there's like 8 or 10 of those parcels, but it's just something that I would encourage you to do so that you aren't spending your resources. I mean, you certainly don't want anybody to be in distress, but it really shouldn't be your responsibility to be answering those calls because they're not paying city taxes. So happy to have that discussion if necessary at a later date, and follow up with the city attorney's office if that's the wish of this board. But those policies are identified under this objective. Any questions about?
Yes, our subdivision is behind a large tract of that type of county property. The problem is they don't want to be city. They want to stay county. So I don't know how you convince them that they need to be city.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, it's a lot of negotiations that has to happen. It's not an easy process. And when it happens where it's been this long, it becomes even more challenging. So I would just encourage a lot of open communication and conversation, and you never know. I would never close the door on the opportunity. And I would encourage the city to continue looking at that because it does the city a disservice, quite frankly.
Yes, I agree.
Sure. Objective 13, this is pretty straightforward. This is dealing with blight within your community. This ties directly to your community redevelopment agency and what they're charged with doing. I don't know that I need to spend a lot of time on this. It's statutorily required that we address blight in your comprehensive plan. So it's pretty black and white, this section. Again, we included the Community Redevelopment Agency and the Downtown Development District on the same map. So you'll see this map reflected in both sections in the comprehensive plan because it deals with both. Dealing with transportation improvements. So we went through here and one specific change that we did make was requiring a traffic impact analysis on projects that are 20 units or above. So making sure that the city is looking at any traffic improvements that are going to be necessary, that are caused by a private development that the city should not have to be responsible for doing. For example, adding turn lanes. Those are things that come out of a traffic impact analysis. If a signal is warranted, city shouldn't have to be on the hook for paying for those improvements. So just making sure that anything that's over 20 units, and if there's a non-residential development that comes through that is above a de minimis impact. So if the city determines that it's an impact that is going to be significant, that comes out of that a traffic impact study should be done because there's going to be a large non-residential component, then you now have the authority, or you will through the adoption of the comprehensive plan, to require that as you desire. So any questions about transportation there? Moving on, we do have a whole element that specifically deals with transportation. Obviously, this is an important part of your comprehensive plan. We spent a lot of time with your staff looking at the transportation network within the city. So obviously, you've got major state roadways that run through the city. And so there's not a lot that we can do with that. I would encourage you to continue having an open and positive relationship with the Florida Department of Transportation District 2. I know that sometimes that can be challenging, but again, communication is going to be your best friend as it relates to transportation improvements within your community. This map is just reflective of the major roadways within the city. We're almost done. We're rounding the bend here. So future land use objective number 15. This is retaining the rural fringe. So you may recall that in your current comprehensive plan, you also have those policies as well. And this is, again, making sure that the most intense development happens towards the core of the city and then tapers out towards the edge of the city and then goes into the rural or more agricultural land use designations. So this is making sure that we're paying attention to that we aren't having a hard edge when somebody comes upon the city, and that we're also making sure we're paying attention to your conservation areas, noting that along 441, you have a very significant conservation area that's essentially at the edge of town. So if you were to look at the future land use map that we have updated, you'll see that we have not encouraged high development, intense development around the conservation lands there because it's important to make sure that we protect those resources. Again, this is also making sure that we look at the timeliness of development. You don't have infrastructure along the edges of town, utility infrastructure in particular. So we want to make sure that we're not inadvertently encouraging development where development isn't quite ready to go. So over the next 20 years, as development starts to creep towards the edge of town, making sure that you have the utility infrastructure in place to be able to accommodate that growth again, so it can pay for itself, is what we've tried to set the stage with these policies. Conservation areas, I won't linger on this. I just talked about this again. This should be pretty intuitive. Statutorily required that we do protect your conservation areas. There's certain language that we need to include in your comprehensive plan. So you see this is relatively unchanged from what you previously had, and just made sure that we trued it up with current future Florida statutes. There is a separate conservation element. It highlights all the things that I just talked about. We will talk a little bit, I guess, after this presentation related to the water facility supply plan. But know that we didn't do anything that was mind blowing in this section. This is really statutorily required. Public utilities, really just focusing on the provision and the siting of the utilities, making sure that, again, development is happening in places where you have utilities already in place or planned. Again, making sure that we're not putting development in places where it's not quite ready for development. And then we also added language specific to the provision of communication towers, electrical substations. Didn't have anything that accommodated that in your current comprehensive plan. So just making sure that as we're updating your comprehensive plan, we're taking into consideration whether or not you have any of those uses that are coming down the pipe. So you'll see that reflected in the public utilities section. There is an entire utilities element for anybody that has the wherewithal to go look at that in its specific. This utilities element covers everything from solid waste, hazardous materials, stormwater, potable water, and wastewater or sanitary sewer. So it's all inclusive of those 5 major headings, and you can see those as subsections specifically called out in the utilities element of the updated comprehensive plan. Have any questions specifically related to that? Commissioner Ambrose, Mr. Mayor, if I may, Commissioner Ambrose, I recall when we started this process, you had asked me about making sure that we were forward thinking and being able to accommodate wastewater technology that we may not already know about. So know that we've included policies that set the stage so that if there's something that comes down the pipe, you're not specifically limited to what we would consider traditional wastewater services. So
I appreciate it. And I was just reading some things this week about stuff going on in the state of Florida and around the country. And I think it's a good thing. So thank you.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So that's one of the roles that we have as serving as your consultant to update the comprehensive plan is to make sure that we listen and try to accommodate. And your staff will tell you that if we think it's a horrible idea or if it's not going to be compliant with Florida statutes, we're not afraid to say no. And your staff was very kind when we did say no. But I also wanted to make sure that you know that we take your comments very seriously. I know that you provided us with an entire list way back when we first started the process. And so hopefully the updates that we did related to that and the other elements, the sections that you had identified have met with your approval. Any other questions related to utilities? Property rights element. So this is a brand new element in your comprehensive plan, not because we wanted to put it in your comprehensive plan, but because it is now statutorily required. The Florida legislature in the 2021 session passed new requirements that specifically state that all local governments have to include a property rights element in the comprehensive plan. There are many different ways to do this. However, the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity provided a template for any local government to use that really literally just hits exactly what is required under Florida statutes. And so at the direction of your staff, that is what we have included in your comprehensive plan. You will see if you were to pull the Florida statutes that it specifically matches word for word exactly what is in that section of Florida statutes. So you will now be compliant with the new property rights element requirement. Intergovernmental coordination, this is exactly what it means. This is a statutorily required element of your comprehensive plan, essentially making sure that it encourages you to continue playing nicely with your neighbors and with state agencies. Every comprehensive plan has this. Some are more robust than others, but really just making sure that you coordinate with Alachua County as appropriate, you coordinate with your neighboring municipalities as appropriate, and certainly you coordinate with Florida state agencies as appropriate. So it's, again, pretty straightforward. Any questions about intergovernmental coordination? You'll hear this referred to as the ICE element, so ICE. Capital improvements, I touched on this briefly before. This is statutorily required, and this addresses all different sections of your comprehensive plan. Again, the basic premise of this is making sure that development coincides with fiscal responsibility of the city, making sure that you have development when you're able to accommodate development. That would be the briefest way that I could explain this element, it does include your capital improvement program from 2021 through 2026. Again, you need to update a plan every year. It doesn't need to be put in your your comprehensive plan every year, but every 5 years you will need to go in and update your comprehensive plan to put in the next 5-year schedule. So come 2026, you're going to want to start working on that and making sure you're looking at your 5-year plan to do an actual text amendment update to your comprehensive plan so that you're compliant with Florida statutes. Any questions about capital improvements? Economic development, I mentioned earlier, this is a new element, is not required under Florida statutes. Many comprehensive plans, many local governments are including this in their comprehensive plans, specifically, again, to be directed towards having something to point back to for grant funding or third-party funding. It's always easier for a funder to say, hey, they've looked at this, they've studied this, they recognize the need for economic development, they have policies in place. So if we can put that in your comprehensive plan, you now have it in 2 different documents. One, the economic development strategy that was prepared last year, and then now you have it formalized in your comprehensive plan, and it really just helps for you to have the supporting documentation if you choose to apply for funding in the future. I would say the only addition that I recall that is not part of the economic development strategy that we put together is this last bullet, specifically dealing with broadband technology. As you know, the current administration is very progressive as it relates to broadband technology and funding for broadband technology. More importantly, as you know, that's an expensive piece of infrastructure to bring to communities, especially to rural communities. And so putting policies in place that allow you, again, to have something to say that we've identified that broadband technology is a need for our community. I'll give you an example. Trying to attract a large business to come to a community that does not have reliable technology is very, very, very challenging. I'm sure that you've all seen businesses come this way that you just can't accommodate because you can't guarantee a reliable technology. This allows you to start planning for some of that. And there is a lot of grant funding that's available right now, filtering through the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity related to broadband technology. So I would encourage you to reach out to our partners at DEO if you had any specific questions about that. But know that we put that in the comprehensive plan to show that the city is thinking about that, and whether you choose to move forward with it, actually implementing any of that is certainly up to this board. Any questions about economic development? Public school facilities element, this is going to be the shortest one that I talk about this evening. I mentioned it's tied to the interlocal agreement that the city has with the Alachua County School Board of Alachua County. I always forget that they say it the other way around. So know that we didn't make any changes to that. It is in compliance with your existing interlocal agreement. And with that, that concludes my overall presentation of the specific policy updates. Again, there is far more reading that you are able and encouraged to do with the rest of the overall comprehensive plan in the actual document itself that goes into a lot more detail than what I provided for you this evening. But I tried to hit the highlights and the things that I thought might be most interesting or important to this board and to the public. I can talk for a minute about next steps. So what happens after, should this board choose to favorably move forward with transmitting this document? What that means is the updated comprehensive plan that you have before you, the data inventory and analysis, and then my favorite, the update, the statutory requirement spreadsheet, all gets forwarded to the Department of Economic Opportunity. The Department of Economic Opportunity sends that out to all related state agencies. I think it goes to 8 or 9 different state agencies. They have a certain time frame to get back to you, and what they will do is they will provide what's called an ORC report, an objections, recommendations, and comments report that will come back to the city, and that will identify anything that we may have put in that might be in conflict with Florida statutes inadvertently. Certainly, we've tried to do a thorough job for you, but first one to tell you, my team and I are not perfect. It's easy for us to miss something as well. And so the state's responsibility is to make sure that we haven't done something that puts you out of compliance with Florida statutes. We'll make those changes to the comprehensive plan, and then it will come back before you for a final adoption hearing, a public hearing. And then there's a 30-day appeal period. I think it's 30 days. And then you will have a newly adopted comprehensive plan should you choose to adopt it at that next hearing. I would expect that will be June or July, that it'll come back before you. And then you get to move on to the update of the land development code regulations, and you kind of you feel like you start this process all over again. But I just I'm happy to pause, Mr. Mayor, and take any questions that you or the public may have.
Can I add something, some other things that we did that minor things that we didn't really mention? There were significant loopholes that developers were using to kind of get around some of our regulations. So we closed those loopholes. So that was another benefit. There were some things in there that really belonged in the LDC. So we, we're taking them out and making sure they belong in the right place now. Actually, it's a lot more user friendly. Before we couldn't find things. So with this, we can now find what we need and people can understand it. And actually, we shortened it some. Actually, more than some. So, believe it or not, it's actually shortened and more user friendly. So I think that it's easier to navigate now. So I don't know. I just think working together, Allison did a really good job for us, and I'm really happy how it turned out.
Thank you.
On the statutory changes, I'm looking here, defines rural agricultural industrial center. What is that?
So that is an actual statutory, so that's in the Florida statutes. I don't have the specific definition committed to memory, but it is something that came into effect in 2011 with the sweeping changes to the growth management legislation. I'm happy to send you the citation from Florida statutes tomorrow.
From the audience.
They might be asleep, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just want to say it was just an absolute pleasure to work on this project. I know it's not for the faint of heart, and it's been a long process. It's clearly what my passion is in terms of planning. I'm not sure why I fell into this, but I take it very seriously, and I want to say that for as seriously as I take it, your staff has rolled up their sleeves, and we've spent countless hours together. They're probably tired of talking to me, but really it has been my honor and my pleasure, and I speak for my whole team to get to work on this project with you and your staff.
Thank you for working with us. All righty. So now we want to go back to one or go to number 3 now.
So they need to take action on number 2, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and then go to 3 and then 1.
3 and then 1. So 2 is, I mean, 1 is not a part of.
Well,
It's a separate document.
yeah, it's a separate document.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So what I can talk about it now, or I can talk about it when you go to item 1, whatever your
However
pleasure,
you want to do it.
whatever your
So
pleasure
we're
is.
going out of number 3 and then we go back to.
Yeah, we need to take action on number 2 first.
Yes.
So you need a motion to go ahead and transmit this to the state of Florida.
No, right now on number
Well-
2, it's just a motion to transmit the comprehensive plan amendment, CPA 21-01, related to the update of the comp plan to the state.
Number 2.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll go ahead and make that motion. Staff has worked really hard and it's come a long way in the last year and a half to transmit CPA 2101 to the state.
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
I'm sorry. Okay. Oh yeah.
Let me see the facts for a minute. Okay, it's not a roll call vote, just a, okay. All in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries.
Thank you.
No, you got it. But y'all did a wonderful job on putting it together. It's laid out really well, and as you said yourself, it's a lot easier to find things in here. So I say kudos to all of you that worked on it. You did a real good job on it.
Yes.
And Christy, like Roy's gonna add, and
That's why I
Christy,
said all of
Christy's like
you.
amazing, so.
Mhm.
As an extension of your staff has acted as an extension of mine, so.
It's a team.
So again, we're just gonna move on to three, or we're gonna go back to one.
Yes, three.
Three, okay, all right. Number three,
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to read the ordinance by title.
yes.
This is ordinance number 2021-06. An ordinance of the City of High Springs, Florida, amending the text of and future land use plan map series, of the City of High Springs Comprehensive Plan as amended pursuant to an application CPA 21-01 by the City Commission under the amendments procedures established in section 163.3161 through 163.3248 Florida statutes as amended, providing for deleting and replacing in its entirety the text in future land use plan map series, including the future land use plan map and the comprehensive plan based upon the evaluation completed by the city to reflect changes in the state requirements and local conditions pursuant to section 163.3191 Florida statutes as amended, providing severability, repealing all ordinances in conflict, and providing an effective date.
Boy, that was a long one there.
Yeah.
All right, commissioners, what's your? Any discussion?
Step, right?
Any discussion?
Think this will do it.
Yes, ma'am.
Make sure I'm looking at the, so are we talking about this map here? This is, and we're just adopting this as our new map.
Yeah, instead of that one, that one.
Okay.
Mhm.
And where it has the yellow for the new medium density residential. Does that mean we have to make that medium density residential?
Yes, ma'am. Well, you don't have to change it. Anything that's currently in place right now, we didn't change any, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, please.
So we didn't strip anybody of their current land use densities or intensities. If anything, there are properties that are going to be able to be more dense and more intense than were previously allowed. So what you see there in the dark yellow on the new map,
Mhm.
those properties currently have 1 to 4 dwelling units per acre. They're going to be able to go up to 1 to 6 dwelling units per acre when the future land use map and the comprehensive plan comes back to you for formal adoption.
To be a transition for some properties, so you don't have really dense neighborhoods next to, really big lots. We
Large
just
lots.
wanted there to be some nice transition zone in there. So the things that, but it kind of makes more sense, I guess.
So does that mean that if it's a density of 1 to 6, that it has to be that? Or could you still develop 1 to 4 or 2 to 4?
So anything between 1 dwelling unit per acre to 6 dwelling units per
Gotcha.
acre. So you could be 2 dwelling units per acre, you could be 4 dwelling units per acre, or you could go up to 6 dwelling units per
I
acre.
understand.
It just provides a little more flexibility for those properties to be developed. It's a great question.
And would that allow for townhomes?
So that is a great question as well. That's where your land development code regulations come in that will specify the specific types of development that can
Okay.
happen on those processes. That's
Okay.
exactly why you now need to roll into updating your land development code.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and move, we adopt 2021-06 as read.
I'll second.
Second, other discussion. Anyone from the audience? Boy, y'all quiet out there tonight.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, Madam Clerk. Yes.
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 Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, so we'll go back to item number 1. So is that? That's Bruce? You back there? On the telephone.
I can. I have not. I don't want to steal your thunder. If you
Go ahead. You wrote it, so I'm just here to explain it.
Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, Allison McGrath, Kimley Horn. Again, we also had the pleasure of working with your staff on updating or actually creating the water facility supply plan. So statutorily, the city should have prepared this plan years ago. It is, again, one of those statutes that gets approved that doesn't necessarily trickle down to the local level. And unless you're updating your comprehensive plan or geekily looking at the updates to the Florida statutes that come out of every, don't put that in your notes, that come out of every legislative session, you may or may not have realized that you were statutorily required to create one of these plans. And so essentially what this does is it looks at the North Florida water supply plan that's provided by the Suwannee River Water Management District and ensures that the city is compliant with their plan. So we have prepared this. We have sent this document to the Suwannee River Water Management District. They have responded favorably to the document that it complies with their current water facility supply plan. I will tell you that they mentioned to me that they are currently in the process of updating their plan, which means that when it gets updated, the city will be statutorily required to update its water facility supply plan. Know that we can't send your comprehensive plan to the DEO for review and adoption before this board until the water supply plan is adopted. It's otherwise your new comprehensive plan will be out of compliance, which is why you're seeing it on your agenda this evening. Happy to answer any additional questions you may have about it.
And we'll have the ordinance that goes along with it on consent for next week.
So it's my understanding you're using data sources from Suwannee River Water Management District to come up with these numbers and calculations. And the fact that we're doing this later than we should have, and they're already in the process of updating that, is why there's a gap in their forecasts and reality. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
100%.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
So,
you're looking at old data because that's the current data that exists.
Yeah, that
Okay,
should have been
'cause-
done in 2020.
all right, yeah, because it's forecasting will possibly reach the population of 6,235 people in 2030.
Right.
So
Right.
as I looked at how that transfers, so until we adopt a new version, anything that we're doing as a commission, we should just all understand, oh, we could be in compliance, but we already know that those numbers are based on outdated data.
For example, like our consumptive use permit in there shows it's 1.5
Right.
MGDs per day. That expires in November. We're in the process of redoing that now. So that number is going to be different on the next go around too,
Okay.
depending on what we get. So
I get what we're doing. I understand it. I can read it much better now. Okay.
So you're redoing the cup right now? You're,
yes,
how much do you anticipate those numbers changing? I mean, 1.5 MGD, do you
It
expect
re-
it's going to change any?
it really depends on what Swanee River comes back after we do it. Mid Towers, we're working with Mid Tower on that right now.
Okay.
We got to finish the application packet and get it over to them. There's a lot of work we're doing in that right now. It could go any direction. It could stay. All we're asking for the same. It could go down. We're flowing about 617 a day right now.
Mhm.
So with the future growth and some of the things we've been talking about doing, we don't anticipate it to change, but there has been a common trend here lately that they have been reducing those numbers, trying to push water conservation. So we won't know until we get closer to November.
Questions? Entertain a motion.
Mayor, I'd go ahead and make a motion that we adopt CPA 2101 as it's been presented for our 10-year water plan.
Second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any other questions? Anyone from the audience? All right. And that, all in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. You're welcome. Madam City Manager, anything else?
No. I wanted to say something clever, but it just like didn't hit my mind.
Didn't come up, okay. Okay. There's nothing else. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion made.
All right, meeting adjourned.